Let's begin the show with India, which recently pledged with the leading nations of the world to cut its emissions to net zero by 2070. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi is one of the more than 120 leaders to have gathered in Glasgow for the COP26 Summit. He also visited Rome for the G-20 Summit on climate change.
Climate change is a global concern which enforces the world powers to join hands and work towards reducing the emissions. In Glasgow, the leaders of some of the world's biggest economies and emitters took to the stage to announce pledge and call for further action during the United Nations COP26 Climate Summit. Many leaders announced commitments to cap emissions from oil and gas production and boost to climate financing until 2025. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi announced 5 goals for his country, including a target of reaching net zero emissions by 2070, 2 decades later than what scientists say is needed to avoid the worst effects of climate change.
पहला, भारत 2030 तक अपनी नॉन फॉसिल एनर्जी कैपेसिटी को 500 गीगावाट तक पहुंचाएगा। दूसरा, भारत 2030 तक अपनी 50% एनर्जी रिक्वायरमेंट्स रिन्यूएबल एनर्जी से पूरी करेगा। तीसरा, भारत अब से लेकर 2030 तक के कुल प्रोजेक्टेड कार्बन एमिशन में 1 बिलियन टन की कमी करेगा। चौथा, 2030 तक भारत अपनी अर्थव्यवस्था की कार्बन इंटेंसिटी को 45% से भी कम करेगा। और पांचवा, वर्ष 2070 तक भारत नेट जीरो का लक्ष्य हासिल करेगा। ये पंचामृत क्लाइमेट एक्शन में भारत का एक अभूतपूर्व योगदान होंगे।
Scientists say the world needs to have global emissions by 2030 and reach net zero by 2050 to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. Delayed by a year because of the COVID-19 pandemic, COP26 aims to keep alive the 1.5-degree target.
First of all, we have to give strong commitments to reduce emissions by 2030. Net zero by 2050 is good, but it's not enough. We need real action during this decade now. For Europe, this minus 55% at least implemented and delivered. Second, we need to agree to a robust framework of rules, for example, to make global carbon markets a reality. Put a price on carbon. Nature cannot pay that price anymore. Number 3, we must mobilize climate finance for supporting vulnerable countries to adapt and leapfrog to clean growth.
UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres told world leaders that humanity was digging its own grave with an addition to fossil fuels. He said greater ambition and action was needed to keep the goal of holding average temperature rises to 1.5 degrees Celsius, a level scientists say would avoid the most destructive consequences of global warming.
The science is clear. We know what to do. First, we must keep the goal of 1.5 degrees Celsius alive. This requires greater ambition on mitigation and the immediate concrete action to reduce global emissions by 45% by 2030. G20 countries have a particular responsibility as they represent around 80% of emissions.
Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi met several world leaders on the sidelines of the COP26 Summit and discussed the ways to fight the global challenges. Modi and his British counterpart Boris Johnson co-chaired the launch of a fund to help small islands developing states build infrastructure to counter the effects of climate change. The initiative aims to provide funds to create disaster-resilient infrastructure in island nations vulnerable to rising sea levels and natural disasters worsened by global warming, such as Fiji, Jamaica and Mauritius, whose leaders also attended the launch. Securing money for poorer nations to help them cut emissions and adapt to the effects of climate change is one of the hot topics at the UN climate talks. Developed countries confirmed they had failed to meet a pledge made in 2009 to provide $100 billion a year in climate finance by 2020. Instead, it would arrive in 2023. COP26 Summit was followed by G-20 Summit in Rome, where the leaders from G20 nations shared a stage to fight against climate change. The world is now aware about the severity of the environmental changes which can be fought together.